Lesson 6, his Varnashram challenge. Between 1965 and 1977, Srila Prabhupada wrote dozens of books, opened over 100 centers, and initiated thousands of disciples worldwide. By 1977, his non-stop sacrifice had taken its toll on his body. Returning to Vrindavan to continue translating Sanskrit texts about Krishna into English, Prabhupada remarked that his days on earth were numbered. When a disciple later asked if he had any regrets, Prabhupada acknowledged he did have, quote, one lamentation, that you have not finished translating the Srimad Bhagavatam. No, that I have not established Varnashram. And Prabhupada made that remark to the devotee who was serving as his nurse that whole time in Vrindavan. This is my godbrother, Abhiram Prabhu. That timeless culture, which shepherds us from the material to the spiritual realm, Varnashram appears repeatedly in Prabhupada's teachings. Yet Prabhupada had been so busy spreading the Hare Krishna movement, he scarcely had time to demonstrate Varnashram's practical application in the modern age. Indeed, only in the last years of his life did he identify Varnashram's social, spiritual features as the key to attracting humanity en masse to Krishna. Quote, this is the next aspect of Krishna consciousness, which I wish to push forward. On these farms, we can demonstrate the full Varnashram system. If these farms become successful, then the whole world will be enveloped by Krishna consciousness. In the cities, we are interested for preaching, but we cannot present the ideal Varnashram system. This is possible only at the farms, so they are very important, unquote. And those were letter excerpts from Srila Prabhupada to Hari Shari Prabhu, as recorded in Tamal Krishna Maharaj's diary entry of 10th August, 1977. Despite the importance Prabhupada gave to Varnashram, his followers have been slow to embrace this most challenging aspect of his mission. To understand why and what to do now, our first task is to recognize the different ways Prabhupada used the term. 4 ways. Number 1, Vedic Varnashram. According to India's Vedic literature, Krishna consciousness once flourished all over the world with a culture at once scientific and spiritual, down to earth and out of this world. Developing their natural vocations or varnas and transcending them in stages, ashrams, people found harmony and fulfillment working together to please Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the Bhagavad Gita 4:13, Lord Krishna teaches, quote, according to the 3 modes of material nature and the work associated with them, the 4 divisions of human society are created by me, unquote. As the parts of the body work together to serve the whole, in Varnashram, 4 broad vocational groups cooperate to serve the social body. In Vedic times, the protectors of that cooperation were samskars. That's this technical Sanskrit term. Samskars, sacred rites of passage through stages of spiritual progress. Prior to conceiving a child, for example, cultured people meditated on the divine, well aware that life comes from life and that the quality of their progeny would reflect the quality of their consciousness, especially at conception. Quote, that is Vedic civilization, Prabhupada observed. Samskar before the birth and immediately after the birth, then one after another. Marriage is also another samskar. There are dasha bidha samskar, 10 purificatory rites. But where is samskar going on today? Nobody takes care of samskar. Still they are declaring, I am Brahman, highborn. Therefore the conclusion is, Kalo Shudra Sambhavaha. Everyone is lowborn. Unquote. This is from a morning walk, 10th April 1974, Bombay. Indeed, the modern chaos reflects the general quality of the world's population, as if born of a bottle of beer on Saturday night. The sacred act that once called souls to enter the world, to revive their love of God, is today routinely reduced to a contact sport, hostile to its natural outcome, conception. Indeed, those who make it into a womb today often don't make it out alive. As Prabhupada liked to present Krishna consciousness as the positive alternative to modern civilization, he knew the days of classic Vedic Varnashram, quote, the days of yore, he called them, were gone. To spread Krishna consciousness everywhere in modern times would require a special adaptation of Varnashram culture, according to, quote, time, candidate, and country. So the first way Prabhupada would talk about Varnashram was classic Vedic Varnashram. And these labels, I'm putting them on, but they do reflect the different ways Prabhupada talked about Varnashram. 2, dormant Varnashram, or you could say latent or potential. So I just dormant. Though classic Varnashram may be gone, its dormant realities endure, awaiting activation. For example, despite utopian attempts to make humanity classless, by nature, classes remain. Speaking with a Russian professor in Moscow during the Soviet era, Prabhupada compared Varnashram to the sun. So this is a direct quote from Prabhupada to Professor Kotovsky. 22nd June 1971 in Moscow's Oriental Institute. Quote, so sunshine is here in America, in Russia, in India, everywhere. Similarly, this Varnashram system is prevalent everywhere in some form or other. Just like the Brahmanas. The Brahmanas means the most intelligent class of men, brain of the society. Then the Kshatriyas, the administrator class. Then the Vaishyas, the productive class. And the Shudras, the worker class. These 4 classes are everywhere present in different names. And because it is creation by the original creator, it is prevalent everywhere. Varnashram. Now, the professor speaking with Srila Prabhupada was an intellectual. Others in his school were administrators, still others workers, and so on. By divine design, different classes of people exist, not to exploit, but to cooperate with one another. Oblivious of that design, the materialistic materialistic classes clash and suffer. The equality we seek fully blossoms in devotional service, where all classes are valued as servants of the Supreme. When these values are forgotten, the Lord's natural Varnashram order becomes corrupted, as India's history shows. So far we have classic Vedic Varnashram, we have dormant Varnashram that's there anyway, it's just not recognized or organized around devotional service. And the third way Prabhupada would talk about Varnashram culture was the materialistic kind. 3, materialistic Varnashram. Quote, the vitiated, which means corrupted, the vitiated caste system of present India is never sanctioned by the scriptures. Prabhupada wrote Indian Deputy Prime Minister Dr. Sardar Patel. But the caste system is made by God according to quality and work of the subject, and it was never designed for the benefit of accidental birthright, unquote. That was a letter written in the late 1940s by Srila Prabhupada to the Deputy Prime Minister of India. Corrupt brahmanas claiming power and privilege based on birth have obscured the truth and beauty of India's original Varnashram culture. Though typecast by the nature we acquire at birth, by engaging in devotional service, we can rise above nature's modes to realize our spiritual potential by cooperatively serving the Lord. Lacking loving service, too often we compete and bargain with one another, treat God like Santa Claus, the great order supplier, and run a ritualistic race to heaven. East or west, such materialistic religion wearies us as it wearies God. It's love we're all after, intimate exchanges of selfless service, the spirit of divine Varnashram culture. So those are the first three ways Prabhupada used the term, and he was not interested in any of those ways. But Prabhupada was interested still in Varnashram, but applied specially for our Kali Yuga. 4. Varnashram for modern times. Varnashram that elevates us from material to spiritual consciousness is called Daivi, or sometimes you see Daiva, depending on how you make the grammar. Daivi, or divine. Prabhupada's Daivi Varnashram for modern times includes 4 essential features. 1. So again, these are the features of the kind of Varnashram that Prabhupada's interested in. 1. Pure devotional service to Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as the goal of life. 2. Local land and cow economics as the model for sustainable living. 3. Varnashram colleges for vocational and spiritual retraining. And 4, the introduction of Daivi Varnashram principles according to, quote, time, candidate, and country, unquote. Borrowing a phrase from the British poet Wordsworth, Prabhupada sometimes referred to Daivi Varnashram as, quote, plain living and high thinking, unquote. When Krishna descended to earth, he himself lived this way in the rural village of Vrindavan as a boy, and later in clean and green Dwaraka city as a youthful prince. If we could show the world a better way to live, Prabhupada reasoned, everyone would eventually take the Daivi Varnashram journey home. Prabhupada's conclusion was the fruit of a lifetime of preaching, but since most modern Hare Krishna people don't live the way Krishna lives, we've been slow to understand how Prabhupada's application of Varnashram to ISKCON evolved over time. So now what we're going to do is take a look in the second part of the lesson at how Prabhupada's attitude toward an application of Varnashram vis-a-vis ISKCON, toward ISKCON, it actually evolved over time, the longer he was with us and the longer he was traveling and preaching all over the world. He developed a conclusion about how to apply Varnashram. So there's 3 applications, and they took place over 3 phases of time. And in the first application, Prabhupada was basically telling us to forget about Varnashram. And this was for the majority of Prabhupada's preaching years with us. From 1966 to 1973, the majority of his global preaching years, Srila Prabhupada often dismissed Varnashram as impractical. Quote, so here's a typical quote from this time period. Therefore, this is the panacea, to engage everyone in Krishna consciousness, chanting Hare Krishna. This is the only remedy. Now you cannot again introduce this system of Varnashram. That was in a 1968 Gita lecture in Los Angeles. While he was launching ISKCON, Prabhupada's priority was to put a head back on society. Prabhupada would say this a lot. We're trying to put a head back on society. Quote, at the present moment, the society is headless, a dead body, or head cracked, crazy. There is head, nonsense head. What is the use of nonsense head? Therefore, there is a great necessity of creating a class who will act as brain and head. That is Krishna consciousness movement. So that's how Prabhupada first conceived ISKCON, as the Brahmins advising the world. And that was from a lecture on the 4th of July, America's birthday in San Francisco, July 1970. Since Brahmins are the head of the Varnashrama social body, as much as possible, Prabhupada was engaging his disciples in Brahminical activities, chanting Hare Krishna, worshiping in the temple, studying and distributing his books, staging spiritual festivals, and so on. For the most part, this strategy worked, but not always, as this exchange with an early follower illustrates. So this is right in the beginning at 26 Second Avenue in 1966. There was one character, his name was Raphael, and he was a very passionate guy. And anyway, here's the quote. This is from Planting the Seed, Lilamrita Volume 2. Quote, one day after a lecture, Raphael approached the Swami, stood beside the dais, and spoke up, exasperated, impatient. Quote, I am not meant to sit in a temple and chant on beads. My father was a boxer. I am meant to run on the beach and breathe in big breaths of air. Unquote. Raphael went on, gesticulating, in other words, gesturing, and voicing his familiar complaints, things he would rather do than take up Krishna consciousness. Suddenly, Prabhupada interrupted him in a loud voice. Then do it! Do it! Raphael shrank away, but he stayed. Ultimately, he did leave, but he didn't. At least at that moment, he stayed. He was chastened by Prabhupada's roaring challenge. Do it. And most did stay in those heady days of spiritual revolution, pleased with the counterculture youth flocking to his clarion call to chant Hare Krishna. Prabhupada still wanted to give Krishna consciousness to everyone, including people who would not chant. Soon, Krishna would set the world stage to help Prabhupada make Varnashram culture more accessible and urgent, starting with his own followers. So 66 to 73, forget Varnashram. And then a new phase came in from, I think it was 73 to 76, yeah, or maybe 75. Phase 2, I call it the world needs Varnashram. In 1973, owing to artificial manipulation of the oil supply in the Middle East, the modern world experienced, quote, an energy crisis. High fuel prices, long fuel lines, and violence dramatized the folly of a civilization based on finite fossil fuels. Amidst the angst, Srila Prabhupada saw an opportunity. Walking and talking with leading disciples the following spring, so now it's the spring of 74. So this goes from 74 to 76, yeah, this phase. Prabhupada noted that if we could show the public a better way to live, they would be more inclined to listen to Krishna. Quote, because if the people are in chaos, how they'll be able to accept the great philosophy? It requires cool brain. So that was a morning walk in Vrindavan. Indeed, a brain nourished by fresh milk from protected cows. Prabhupada wrote, Okay, so indeed, a brain nourished by fresh milk from protected cows, Prabhupada wrote, quote, can assimilate the subtle form of spiritual knowledge. That's a quote from Prabhupada's Light of the Bhagavat, text 27. To show the world a better way to live, Prabhupada's followers would have to learn and teach the fundamentals of Varnashram culture. And so here's another quote from a morning walk, this time in Vrindavan. Oh, again in Vrindavan. Quote, a Varnashram college has to be established immediately, Prabhupada declared. Quote, everywhere, wherever we have got our center, a Varnashram college should be established, unquote. The devotees were astonished. Why was Prabhupada reversing his attitude toward Varnashram? Because at first he was saying, forget it. But as they continued to walk with him, they began to understand his new direction as an extension of his compassion. And here's another morning walk quote. Quote, devotee, personally, he has no problem, but he pushes himself in this degraded society to teach how to live, how to become gentlemen. Otherwise, we have no business. But if we don't give them the opportunity, they'll not be able to come to Krishna consciousness. So this is classic Prabhupada. He's not content just to have his own little happy ISKCON society. He wants to invite the whole world to take advantage of Krishna culture, Daivi Varnashram culture. Since devotees are already with Krishna, Prabhupada continued, they don't need Varnashram, but humanity needs Varnashram to learn how to live and come to Krishna. It wasn't long before Prabhupada would further extend his compassion by telling the devotees how much they too needed Varnashram, humanity's, quote, stepping stone for spiritual understanding. That's a phrase from Gita, as it is purport 231. So it went from, the evolution went from forget it, you don't need it, it's not practical, it's not possible, to okay, let's do this Varnashram to show the world a better way to live. But then by the end of his stay with us, Prabhupada saw how, we were so needy and fallen that we needed it too. We also needed the bridge from this world to the other world. Phase 3, you need Varnashram. On February 14th, 1977, in his quarters in Mayapur, Srila Prabhupada reminded the devotees how important it was for them to inspire and educate people by following Varnashram principles. When a disciple pointed out that Lord Chaitanya dismissed Varnashram as, quote, external, Prabhupada replied, quote, our position is different. Our duty is that we shall arrange the external affairs also nicely, that one day they will come to the spiritual platform very easily, paving the way, unquote. When another disciple wondered why devotees who were already on the spiritual platform, beyond the designations of Varna and Ashram, should follow Varnashram principles, Prabhupada challenged his assumption. And so this is a very telling quote now. This is where Prabhupada's directly telling us that we need Varnashram. Quote, Varnashram should be established to become Vaishnava or devotee. It is not so easy to become a Vaishnava. If to become Vaishnava is so easy, why so many fall down? It is not easy to become Vaishnava. So the longer Prabhupada preached in the West, the more he saw how even his own followers would need the Varnashram bridge to come to Krishna. As his life on earth was drawing to a close, Prabhupada knew that building the bridge, a bridge the whole world could cross, would be a great challenge. So Prabhupada really saw that we needed it too. We need to live in a Varnashram or a Varnashram style culture to help us go from this world to the next. So, so Prabhupada saw it would be a great challenge. So that's the rest of the lesson I call is Varnashram Challenge. That's the title of the lesson. In lesson 5, we saw how Srila Prabhupada expanded the Hare Krishna movement in phases. Whereas earlier phases focused on Brahminical concerns and activities, holy names and holy books, temples and deity worship, initiation and congregation, the Varnashram phase invites everyone to help build a spiritual society. In the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 12, texts 8 through 10, Lord Krishna makes a similarly progressive entreaty. Quote, "Just fix your mind on me," he advises the advanced listener. For the less advanced, the Lord then recommends the disciplines of devotional yoga. Quote, "In this way, you will develop a desire to attain me." And for those not ready to follow strict vows, Prabhupada recommends working for him. In his commentary to text 10, Prabhupada reaches out to all kinds of readers. Quote, "There are many devotees who are engaged in the propagation of Krishna consciousness, and they require help. So even if one cannot directly practice the regulative principles of bhakti yoga, he can try to help such work. Every endeavor requires land, capital, organization, and labor." Notice he's appealing directly to Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudra types. This voluntary service to the cause of Krishna consciousness will help one to rise to a higher state of love of God, whereupon one becomes perfect. Unquote. Where most people live in or near cities, it is natural to engage them in building temples to attract everyone to Krishna. At the same time, the modern urge to live a simpler, more natural way of life will find fulfillment the more devotees engage people in building spiritual communities that live the way Krishna lives. And now I'm going to give you a quote from Prabhupada's one and only visit to Gitanagari, the most advanced farm at that time in southeastern Pennsylvania, where I had an opportunity to live for many years. I wasn't there then when he said this, but here's a nice quote from Prabhupada's overnight visit to Gitanagari in mid-July 1976. Quote, "This Krishna consciousness movement is trying to revive village organization, as you are trying here. Krishna in his natural life is a village boy in Vrindavan. Vrindavan is a village, but it does not mean that we shall avoid city life or town life. No, everything, every place is Krishna's place. Everywhere there should be Krishna consciousness." Unquote. Srila Prabhupada's Daivi Varnashram village holds the keys to unlock the modern eco challenge. So especially as the world gets more and more unsustainable and chaotic, ecology, the environment is such a thing, it's such an issue. And we should be the leaders actually inviting people to live a better life, but we've been behind. That standing order that Prabhupada gave to start Varnashram colleges wherever we have a center, that hasn't been done. There's a little few attempts, just like Shivaram Maharaj has his Bhaktivedanta College in Budapest, and in Radhadesh they have a Bhaktivedanta College there in southeastern Belgium. But these are just little sprouts. They're just beginnings. We should be the leaders. And if we were, boy, we'd actually have a practical alternative to show people. Srila Prabhupada's Daivi Varnashram village holds the keys to unlock the modern eco challenge. Quote, "If these farms become successful, then the whole world will be enveloped by Krishna consciousness." Unquote. That's that letter Prabhupada wrote to Hari Shauri. And since the Varnashram College holds the blueprints to the village, quote, the Varnashram College has to be established immediately, everywhere, wherever we have got our center, unquote. Town or country, reviving divine Varnashram culture will illumine our natural place in Krishna's world. And by appreciating one another as his eternal servants, we will find the freedom, equality, and happiness we seek in this life and the next. So I forgot to remind you to think about questions. Yeah, I forgot to do that in the script. But anyway, that's the end. So I will take questions now, but here's a little one sentence giving you a preview of the next lesson. Having seen the scope of Srila Prabhupada's Varnashram vision, in lesson 7, we'll look at how to find our individual mission in his mission. So if you have any questions about where do I fit in Prabhupada's Daivi Varnashram vision, that's next time. But if you have any questions about, you know, the 4 ways Prabhupada used the term or the 3 ways he applied Varnashram to ISKCON during his time with us, that's especially welcome. Okay, Hare Krishna Prabhus, thanks for listening. I'll be very happy to listen to you now.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you for the class. Fascinating. And yeah, thank you. Now I think that you talk very clearly, you know, about what Varnashrama is and what it isn't. And yes, we have questions on how to find yourself and where to start, you know, in Varnashrama.
That's next time.
Yeah, got it. Thank you. Maybe this question then. So for devotees, they don't have to strictly follow Varnashrama, right? Varnashrama is for the world, to bring them to the level where they can start devotional service. Is that correct?
Okay, the question is, we're devotees, so we don't really need to strictly follow Varnashram, right? So what did Prabhupada say at the very end of his life as he was evolving his Varnashram vision for ISKCON and the world? He told the devotees, you need it. If you don't need Varnashram, if you're actually, quote, devotees, then why are so many falling down? And Prabhupada was actually even referring to his trusted leaders who were coming and going. They couldn't, you know, Prabhupada did have us on kind of an emergency mode while he was with us, because it was exploding Krishna consciousness all over the world. But you can't keep people in an emergency situation forever. Ultimately, people have to retain the urgency of Krishna consciousness without always being on the emergency mode. For example, when the Americans had their revolution against the British, then everybody, every patriot, everybody who wanted the British out of America picked up a gun, whether they were farmers or doctors or shopkeepers, or it just became a volunteer army of all kinds of people. So that worked, you know, temporarily, but then ultimately they had to go back to being who they were, because society, you know, once the revolution was a success and the British left, then everybody had to go back to being who they were. So it worked for a time of Prabhupada pouring everybody into that Brahminical mold to try to put a head back in society. But ultimately, in any population group, including Vaishnava population groups, there's only going to be a small percentage of the population, maybe 2 or 3% or 5% at the most, who are going to be priests and teachers, you know, intellectuals and holy men. Most people will be in Shudra Varna, Shudra meaning assistant, not Shudra in the bad sense of being foolish and hopeless or whatever, or unprincipled. So most people are assisting the 3 higher Varnas, Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, people of intellectuals, people let's say, of people of power. People like to wield power to in Varnashram culture, not to exploit, but to make sure everybody's protected. A Kshatriya is a protector. He's not a bully. And the Vaishyas, if they're Vaishnavas and not simply perverted reflections of Vaishyas, Vaishya Bandhus is the term, then they're people of resources, and they like to see that everybody has an equal chance at using the resources of nature to maintain themselves. And the balance is the assistance, the Shudra Varna, which assists all these other classes in actually doing the work. So in terms of ISKCON, the question was a little loaded because it says, we're devotees. Okay, so number one is, we're not devotees, we're aspiring devotees. The term, and the technical term is Praya Vaishnav, aspiring devotees. So it's really dangerous to assume that I'm a devotee, because that means if I think like that, I can't really improve because nobody can tell me anything. Hey, I'm a devotee, I'm transcendental. Get off my case, right? So we're not through and through full-fledged devotees yet. We're in the maturation process. We're getting there, but we have a lot to learn. We have a lot to leave behind in terms of anarthas. And so then the question was, we don't have to follow all the rites and rituals. No, we don't. In terms of Vedic Varnashram, we're not back in, a different yuga. We're not coming from a culture where there's no need for Varnashram colleges because the culture is passed down. There's pure lines of Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and even Judras. So everybody is taking the culture in from their parents, going way back. It's just it's part of the culture. So, but we need Varnashram colleges because we need to be retrained in the whole concept of being not this body, servant of God, and we all have a part to play in the social body and how all those social roles work together and how we're not meant to compete with one another. We're meant to cooperate with one another. So yes, in ISKCON, we don't have it yet. We're still in a pre-Varnashram culture. But the more we actually are able to show the whole world a better way to live in terms of plain living and high thinking, in terms of living cooperatively instead of exploitively, that will be so attractive that people will actually take the book seriously. We can distribute books till we're blue in the face and double it and double it and double it. But we won't really have that much of an impact unless and until we can show the world a better way to live. In the city temples, it's for getting people in the door to expose them. In the cities, we're like first responders at a catastrophe, right? And people come staggering in off the street, or maybe we pull them out of a college, but we're right where the population is. And these cities are hellish in Kali Yuga, by and large. And we give them a vision of the absolute truth, Sri Radha and Krishna, and we give them a taste of prasadam. And we give them Prabhupada's books. But then over time, what we really have to give them is an example of the way this works, this culture works. Prabhupada called it village life. He told us in Gita Nagari, he told the devotees. So this you are trying, village life. Krishna is a village boy living in Vrindavan. Or if you're attracted to worshiping Krishna in his Dwarka Leela, then we can make these cities real clean and, like I said, clean and green, Dwarka. Cities are also part of Vedic culture, but they're not these polluted dungeons of demons, as Prabhupada called these cities. Dungeons of demons, these polluted, crime-ridden, unhealthy places. So there's a lot of work to do in understanding still Prabhupada's unfulfilled phase of Prabhupada's mission, the second half, the big second half. And then, finding our place in there. That's the subject of the next lesson. So we shouldn't dismiss Varnashram, nor should we think we have to somehow become like, Vedic Indians or something. No, it's not all about that. It's all about, according to time, country, and candidate, how that Varnashram culture will blossom all over the world. It will naturally take on the flavor of wherever it is. A Daivi Varnashram culture was going to look really different in a place like Belarus, as opposed to some place in South America, in the Amazon, or some place in North America or Africa. It's all going to take on a certain flavor because Lord Chaitanya's movement is for everybody. And as Prabhupada would tell us, yes, you can chant Hare Krishna to the tune of your country. Not only the tune, but the food and the dress and everything's going to look a little different because we're all coming from different karmic trajectories, So why have some of us landed in Russia? Why have some of us landed in America this life? That's just our karma. So yeah, the Daivi Varnashram culture is Daivi because the goal is pure devotional service to Krishna. But it'll be a lot of variety in the flavors of how it manifests all over the world. So stay tuned. That's this big challenge still awaiting us, and we have to address it. Otherwise, we'll be letting Prabhupada and Krishna down. The whole world is crying for a better way to live. Krishna knows how to live, and he wants us to be able to show that. Good question.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. The world is crying for a better way to live. No doubt about it. We've got one more question from the chat. Did I understand it right that first we need to become Brahmanas, try to create Varnashrama within ISKCON, and then offer it to the world? Meaning the main goal is to get educated and then to pass it on further.
Okay, the first part was, did you get it right that first we need to become Brahmanas and then repeat the second part?
First we need to become Brahmanas, create Varnashrama within ISKCON, and then offer this to the world.
You almost got it right. I mean, that was what Prabhupada tried in the beginning. He tried to pour everybody in the Brahminical mold. And because Prabhupada was so captivating and the movement was such an explosion, it kind of worked. But over time, as I said, most people are not by nature in the Brahmana Varna. The Brahmana Varna, there's 6 businesses, Prabhupada said. Patan patan, yajan yajan, dana pratigraha. Somebody who's actually, whose natural vocation is a Brahmin, studies and teaches. Patan patan. Yajan yajan, worships and shows others how to worship. Dana pratigraha, gives liberally in charity, like the devotees are distributing books. That's called the highest charity. It's the gift of knowledge. Gives in charity and receives charity, because in a true Varnashram society, the devotees, for example, aren't taxed because they're well, I won't go there. What shall I say? The devotees are valued. Their devotees are valued. Their service is valued as being essential workers. We say during COVID, so-and-so are essential workers. Therefore, they must be given the personal protective equipment first because they're ministering to people. They're giving people food. They're giving people medicine. They're giving people shelter. So in a Daiva Varnashram society, devotees are considered the most essential workers. Okay, so, but when Prabhupada, again, when he saw the reality of the situation amongst even his own followers, he was, and this is actually coming up in the next lesson, he was encouraging them to, as he did not encourage them before. It was an emergency, so everybody just run out the door, distribute books, men, women, children, hold festivals, and that's it. Forget Varnashram. But the more he was with us, the more he saw the need for everybody to be, as he would say, rightly situated in their natural work, their natural duties. So devotees, by definition, if they're actually practicing Krishna consciousness under the guidance of a bona fide spiritual master, they're becoming Brahminical by ashram, not by Varna necessarily, because again, most people aren't doing Brahminical work, they're doing other kinds of work. But say so someone comes into ISKCON, and then they start practicing a Brahminical lifestyle by ashram. In other words, the morning program. Getting up early, worshiping the deity, or bathing, getting clean, worshiping the deity, chanting Hare Krishna, hearing Bhagavatam, worshiping the spiritual master. These are all Brahminical activities, but it's part of the ashram of being in ISKCON. You're going to see this next lesson. It's coming. So a Brahmana, as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati brilliantly pointed out to the caste Brahmins, a Vaishnav is more than a Brahmin, because a Vaishnav knows the supreme Brahman, Krishna. Whereas an ordinary Brahmin or a caste Brahmin, he might know Brahman or spirit, but he might not know the goal of life, to serve the supreme spirit. So devotees are automatically practicing a Brahminical lifestyle in the sense that we follow 4 regulative principles, we chant a prescribed number of rounds, and we're rising early and we're resting early if we're actually doing it properly, or if our lifestyle permits it. Sometimes our work doesn't even permit that, as you probably well know. So, but as far as possible, we are practicing a Brahminical lifestyle. That doesn't mean we're in Brahmana Varna. It means our whole life, our bhakti life, is Brahminical, because we're practicing cleanliness, truthfulness, kindness, self-control, which is what happens when we avoid intoxication, illicit sex, meat eating, and gambling. So that's a common misconception, that devotees are automatically Brahmins in the Varna sense. No, in the ashram sense, we're Brahminical. So yes, and then we imbibe that life, and as we'll see again next lesson, I keep referring to next lesson, that we share that bhakti life with others according to their situation. As Mahaprabhu said, quoting Lord Brahma, sthane stitak shuddhigatang tanuvan manovir. It's not necessary that people change their natural position in society, but they should simply hear about Krishna and gradually become Krishna conscious. This was Mahaprabhu's preaching. Yeah. So I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. And just a small question. Will you also talk about how women fit into Varnashrama? Because we have this stereotype, when they talk Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, somehow an idea of a man always comes to mind. But Prabhupada invited everyone to this, not Varna, but Ashrama that you are talking about. So will you touch upon that?
Sure. Yeah. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he was the one who started breaking initiation up into first and second. And also he separately initiated ladies. In classic Vedic Varnashram, the ladies don't even need to do that because the culture is so intact and pure that the lady is naturally following the Varna of the husband and getting the benefit of the husband's spiritual qualification. Just like Kardamuni and Devahuti, third canto. So Devahuti, she's a princess. And she's given over to Kardamuni by Swayambhuva Manu, who's a Mahajan. And even though his daughter, Devahuti, was used to, palace life, royal life, because the father, Swayambhuva Manu, was a Mahajan who knew the value of life. He wanted his daughter to marry a sage. Now, automatically, if you marry a sage who's actually, living like a sage, that's going to mean a step down in lifestyle, right? In standard of living externally, material standard of living. And indeed, Devahuti, over time, she began to lose her royal beauty and her health wasn't good. But Kardamuni, because he had the order from his father, Lord Brahma, to propagate, and then he was given this beautiful wife, then because he is a great sage, great devotee, he took compassion on his wife, and he remembered his mission is to create good progeny. So then he created this aerial mansion. My God, it wasn't. It was just amazing out of his mystic power. And then out of his mystic power, he gave her so many maidservants to revive her beauty underwater with those maidservants, which itself is a very mystical event. And then her beauty is restored, her strength is restored, and now she's fit to produce progeny. So in one of the purports there, Prabhupada talks about how it's very important in Varnashram culture that the lady marries up, so to speak, that the qualifications of the husband are, by Varna are more. She's a Kshatriya. So Kshatriyas in the Varnashram scheme are beneath Brahman, but they're very close because the Brahmins advise, and the Kshatriyas translate that good advice into policy to protect all of the citizens. So she adored Kardamuni, Devahuti, and that's why she was willing to undergo austerities to assist him in his bhajan, his sadhana, even at the expense of her own health. So that's way back, Vedic times. Fast forward to the turn of the century or early 20th century, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he revived sannyas, he initiated people first and second, and he initiated ladies separately from their husbands. Prabhupada's own sister was a disciple of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. And she had received the name Bhavatarini Devi Dasi. And she was great devotee. So in the mission, and so that was just the first attempt at a society, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's Gaudiya Math. And of course, it didn't survive in a unified way because they disobeyed Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's orders to make a GBC, cooperate, and don't try to replace the Founder-Acarya, which is him, Bhaktisiddhanta. But Prabhupada, he took it further. So even in the time when Srila Prabhupada, to get back to your question about the role of ladies, even at the time where Prabhupada was dismissing Varnashram and saying, just chant Hare Krishna, we got to put a head back in society, he was encouraging the ladies like anything to be all they could be in devotional service, regardless of classic Vedic roles. You might know the history of how Prabhupada took his first Western disciples to India, and he had his Vaishnavis lecturing thousands of people in pandals and worshipping the deity in India, even in Prabhupada's time. So, and in purports, Prabhupada saying the girls are as good as their brothers because they're preaching Krishna consciousness. And in 1969 December, it would take me a while to bring it up, but Prabhupada wrote this now famous letter to Himavati, my god sister, who was the wife of Hansa Duda. They were early pioneers of the movement in the 60s. And Prabhupada's encouraging. Yeah, the old way was in India was that everything was from the man's side. Everything was done by the men. But this is not what we're doing in the line of Lord Chaitanya. So whatever you can do, you do. You're in a leadership role, fine. I'm just paraphrasing now, but that was the mood of the letter. So especially in Lord Chaitanya's movement, where we're not interested in mundane varnashram, which is based on just on bodily designations. It's based on a spiritual conception that we start from the fact that we're not these bodies, and we're playing roles in society according to our bodily situation, but more we're encouraged to be all we can be, fulfill our spiritual potential, which sometimes is different from bodily roles. So we're interested in building a society based on qualification, spiritual qualification, not on bodily designations. And that is the bottom line for Srila Prabhupada.
Jai.
Okay, Jai.
Thank you.
All right.
We're looking forward to the next session.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, it follows naturally from this session, because when you hear about Prabhupada's Daivi Varnashram vision, then if you're living like a modern person in these hellish cities, you begin to think, well, what am I doing? How am I contributing to this evolution of consciousness on Earth? And should I just quit the city? And that's not like that at all. But you'll see in the next lesson how we all have a place in Prabhupada's grand Daivi Varnashram vision. Okay, thank you very much.